Welcome to Cinematic Excrement. I'm the Smeghead, and I have a question for Mr. M. Night Shyamalan. What the hell happened to you, man? It wasn't that long ago that you made a name for yourself with The Sixth Sense. That was an exceptional film, one of the best I've ever seen. So how is it that in just a little over a decade, you went from that to this? You've been gradually sinking to this level over the last 10 years, with every film becoming just a little bit worse than the one that came before it. And every time you make a new movie, I keep thinking, this is it. This is as bad as you can get. You can't possibly make a film worse than this. You finally hit rock bottom, and there's nowhere to go from here but up. Why do you have to keep proving me wrong? Stop it!
100 years ago, all was right with our world. Prosperity and peace filled our days.
Then Dick Cheney was born.
The four nations, water, earth, fire, and air nomads lived amongst each other in harmony. Great respect was afforded to all those who could bend their natural element.
Because if you didn't respect them, they bent to you.
He was the only person born amongst all the nations who could master all four elements. He was the only one who could communicate with the spirit world.
They blocked everyone else's calls.
Spirit's guidance, the Avatar kept balance in the world. And then 100 years ago, he just disappeared.
And that jerk still owes me $10. Wow, you're calling this book 1 right off the bat, eh? You seem pretty confident that you'll be able to make books 2 and 3. Might I advise you not to count your chickens before they bomb at the box office? Our story begins by following two young siblings who belong to the so-called Southern Water Tribe, Sokka and Katara, played respectively by Jason Rathbone and Nicola Peltz. Katara is apparently a waterbender, and Sokka is apparently useless.
In this time of war, food is scarce. My brother and I often go hunting for food, but unfortunately my brother isn't the best hunter in the world.
Get used to those narration voiceovers. There's gonna be a lot of them. How did we end up in Warcraft 3?
Zug zug.
They come across a frozen lake and notice something glowing under the ice. Since he's an idiot, Sokka does this. Gee, maybe chopping away at the thin ice underneath you was a bad idea. Who'd have thought? I would like to point out that this stupidity does not happen in the cartoon. That's purely Shyamalan's doing. So they back away, and this big-ass sphere comes out of the ice that appears to have a person inside. Not learning from her brother's mistake, Katara hacks at it a couple of times and gets knocked back. The sphere splits open to reveal a child, played by Noah Ringer, and a big furry creature, played by CGI.
What's your name? How did you get here? How did you get in the ice?
You want to let him answer a question before we move on to the next one? Just a suggestion. So Sokka pokes the beast with his stick, or rather he pokes the ice around it since it's not really there, and they take boy and beast back to their village. This time Katara follows my advice and asks one question at a time.
How'd you get all the way out here?
I ran away from home. We got in a storm. We were forced under the water of the ocean.
You were forced under the water, ocean is implied, or vice versa if you prefer. Who wrote this stupid dialogue? Oh, right. Unfortunately, when the boy was freed from his icy prison, it shot a bright light into the sky that was seen by some people from the Fire Nation.
Uncle, look!
That definitely wasn't dubbed in post, so the Fire Nation army tracks them down and storms the village.
Sokka, don't.
The leader of the group introduces himself as Prince Zuko, heir to the throne of the Fire Lord. Zuko is played by Dev Patel of Slumdog Millionaire fame, who apparently didn't want to shave one of his eyebrows to better resemble his cartoon counterpart. He demands that the village elderly be brought out, one of whom is Katara and Sokka's grandmother.
Katara, don't.
So they constantly have to remind each other not to do something stupid. Something tells me their gene pool could have used a little more chlorine. Speaking of the gene pool, how did a village of Eskimos manage to give birth to two white kids? While they search for the elderly, one of the troops discovers the boy's tattoos and brings him before Zuko.
Who are you? What's your name?
One question at a time! This is not difficult! Zuko demands that the kid come with him, or else he'll burn down the village. Without hesitation, he complies. As they leave, one of the troops does this. I'm sorry, was that supposed to be threatening? I mean, I've seen the cartoon, I know bending the elements requires various movements, but this? This just looks silly.
They were looking for someone old, and they were looking for someone with the same markings the boy had.
Was that supposed to be one sentence?
They dragged Mom away the same way when we were babies.
If you were babies at the time, how could you remember that? God, this movie is loaded with terrible acting and shitty dialogue. I can usually handle one or the other, but when you combine them both into one big turd sandwich, it gets hard to sit through. Anyway, Katara says they should try to help the boy, but Sokka points out that they're on a ship and they have no way of catching up to them. But then they step outside and discover that the big furry beast, whose name, by the way, is Appa, can fly. They refer to him as a flying bison, though it appears to be a combination of a bison, a beaver, and... cat bus? The two kids tell their grandmother, the only other white person in the village, of their plans to rescue the boy. Surprisingly, she's okay with it. She also mentions that the tattoos the boy had resembled airbending tattoos, and she believes the boy may be the Avatar, the one who can master all 4 elements. But before she can see her grandchildren off, she apparently has to give them, and us, a history lesson.
Once, a long time ago, the spirit world kept balance over us.
What is the spirit world, Grandma?
Well, it's not a place made up of things you can touch, but it exists nonetheless. It is filled with the most amazing forms of dazzling creatures that exist in the most exotic valleys, mountains, and forests. Each of these creatures is a spirit. They have watched over us since the beginning. They have guided us. And only the Avatar...
Wait, hold it. I think we have a problem here. My care cup is totally empty! Can we skip the pointless backstory and get back to the plot? Meanwhile, back on Zuko's ship, his uncle Iroh is applying a simple test to the boy they just kidnapped. And don't ask me how that can be his uncle. Zuko is clearly East Indian, and as we learn later on, so is his father. So how can the Fire Lord's brother be a Persian? First, our heroes are the only Anglos in a tribe of Eskimos, and now this? Who signed off on this shitty casting job? Oh, right. Anyway, the test involves placing each of the 4 elements in front of the boy and seeing if they react. They all do, which tells them that this boy must be the Avatar. Zuko tells the boy that he will be taken back to the Fire Nation, but the boy decides it would be better to escape. He easily evades the guards and transforms his staff into a glider. Using the power of airbending, he flies away and meets up with Katara, Sokka, and Appa.
Aang flew us to his home. He told us how he left there in a storm on Appa and got forced into the ocean where they almost drowned. Aang airbended a sphere around them and ice formed, and he couldn't remember anything after that.
So they arrive at the Southern Air Temple, which was once the home of the boy whose name is apparently Aang, judging by Katara's last narration. He calls out to his friends, but no one seems to be home.
Is it okay if you tell me your name?
The monks named me Aang.
Wait a minute, why are you asking him that? You just told us his name in your last narration. Did you forget already? God, who's responsible for that colossal fuck-up? Oh, what a twist. While we're on the subject of Shyamalan's questionable decisions, if you're a fan of the cartoon, you may have noticed that some of the names are pronounced differently in the movie. Sokka instead of Sokka, and Aang instead of Aang. That's because Shyamalan wanted the Asian names to have the correct Asian pronunciation. I would actually agree with this decision if he showed the same racial sensitivity with his casting choices. Pronouncing Chinese names correctly doesn't matter if the actors with those names are of American, Iranian, or Indian descent. In fact, that might be more racist. Anyway, Aang continues his search, and eventually he does find his friends. Or at least what's left of them. Katara tells Aang that he was likely trapped in the ice for almost a century, and his friends are long gone.
The Fire Nation knew the Avatar would be born into the air nomads. So they exterminated all the air nomads.
You're lying!
What?
You're lying!
Oh my god. You know what that reminds me of?
Hey, these aren't bad. What's in them? There's waffle in them! You're lying!
It sounds every bit as ridiculous as Invader Zim. The problem is, Invader Zim is a comedy. It's supposed to sound ridiculous. Shyamalan actually expects us to take this...
You're lying!
Seriously. Oh, and this too. Anyway, Aang's eyes and tattoos start glowing, and he involuntarily forms his own little hurricane. And then he... ends up in Night Elf territory. Sure, why not? He gets a brief, cryptic message from what appears to be a fucking dragon before Katara manages to talk him out of his trance. Meanwhile, back on the water of the ocean, the Fire Nation's commander Zhao, another Indian with a Chinese name, comes across Prince Zuko's ship and invites him and General Iroh to lunch, mainly so he can rub the prince's misfortunes in his face.
As you know, the Fire Lord has banished his son, the prince, and renounced his love of him and will not let him return to the throne unless he finds the Avatar. The Fire Lord believes his son is too soft, and by doing this, he will become strong and become a worthy heir to the throne.
Everybody got that?
Eventually, Zuko has had enough pointless exposition and storms out, and he returns to his ship to take out his anger on the crew.
Hadouken!
Meanwhile, Aang and company stop somewhere in the Southern Earth Kingdom because... I guess it seemed like a good idea at the time, when suddenly they spot a boy running away from some Fire Nation troops. They declare that the boy is under arrest for earthbending, which is forbidden in these parts. Our heroes decide to defend the boy. Or at least they attempt to. So our heroes are captured and thrown into the Fire Nation's version of Tent City. But once Aang realizes that all the people in this prison are earthbenders, he tells everyone that he is the Avatar and has returned to help them. And he points out to their dumbasses that they are in fact standing on Earth, which they can use as a weapon.
Wait. We're standing on Earth? Duh, we never think of that.
These have got to be the dumbest fucking earthbenders on the planet. This scene is actually based on an episode of the cartoon, but with one very important difference. In the cartoon, the earthbenders were held captive on a Fire Nation naval vessel. The ship was made entirely of metal, which they were unable to bend. So their inability to fight back actually made sense. But apparently making sense is a foreign concept to Mr. Shyamalan. Anyway, with Aang's help, they all tell the Fire Nation to piss off. I'll spare you most of the fight scene since it's poorly choreographed and looks very silly, though I will admit the CGI looks pretty good. To thank them for their freedom, the Earthbenders reward our heroes with a waterbending scroll. Quite convenient since Aang has to learn how to bend water, as well as the other elements, in order to do his job as Avatar. But he needs a proper instructor, so they decide to seek out the waterbenders of the northern continent, stopping to free a few villages from Fire Nation control along the way. Hey, could you just stand there looking like an idiot while I kick your ass? Thank you.
The scroll we had was proving to be helpful. Aang was practicing, but for some reason, he was having trouble with waterbending.
Really? In the cartoon, Aang picked up the basics of waterbending right away. The movie completely contradicts that. And... pointlessly so. What do they accomplish by changing that? Back in the Fire Nation, Zhao informs Fire Lord Ozai, played by Cliff Curtis, that his men have raided an ancient library and uncovered scrolls that may help them find the location of the moon and ocean spirits here on Earth.
With this information, we could bring down the Northern Water Tribe city. We could show the world the true strength of fire.
I am pleased.
This is my pleased face. Meanwhile, in the Northern Earth Kingdom, in Fire Nation Colony 15, because we really needed to know that, Prince Zuko is pouting over his inability to catch the Avatar. His uncle tries to cheer him up, but Zuko will have none of it.
Hey, little one, come here. Tell me what you know about the prince.
He did something wrong.
He spoke out of turn to a general in defense of some of his friends.
Okay, stop, that's enough. We don't have time for this shit, so let me summarize. Zuko spoke out of turn and, as punishment, was forced to duel with his father. He refused, so his father burned him to teach him a lesson. Then he was exiled, and now he has daddy issues. The end. Is there any dialogue in this movie that isn't exposition? Aang briefly leaves Sokka and Katara behind so he can visit the Northern Air Temple, because he thinks that if he visits another spiritual place, he may be able to talk to that dragon he saw earlier. When he arrives at the temple, he meets... Randall Duck Kim? First Dragon Ball evolution, and now this? Randall, do yourself a favor and hire a better agent. He guides Aang into a room with statues of the previous avatars, but it turns out he was paid off by the Fire Nation to lure him down there so they could capture him. Why they needed him to do this, I have no clue. This was also based on an episode of the cartoon, which, again, was handled much better than the movie. While Aang is imprisoned, he falls into a trance and ends up in Teldrassil again. The dragon spirit tells him to go to the Northern Water Tribe, which is what he was already doing. Thanks for the advice, Captain Obvious. Sometime later, a masked warrior enters Aang's cell and sets him free. The two try to escape, but after a monotonous sequence of slow-motion effects, they are cut off. Commander Zhao warns them not to kill the Avatar, since he'll just be reincarnated again, and they'll have to start their search all over. After hearing this, the masked warrior gets an idea.
Why are you doing this? Who are you?
One question that... oh, forget it. Zhao reluctantly lets them go, but then a sniper knocks out the masked warrior. Aang removes the mask to discover the warrior is actually Zuko. The army charges after them, but Aang uses his airbending to conceal their escape. Aang drops Zuko off in a safe place and runs off to rejoin Katara and Sokka. Zuko returns to his ship to rest, but... oh no, Zuko, no. Yeah, if you believe for 1 second he's actually dead, I got this bridge I'd like to sell you. Finally, our heroes reach the Northern Water Tribe.
We arrived at the Northern
Wait a minute. Oh my god, the cinema snob was right. Her hair does look like a...
Wang! Pay attention.
I was distracted by that enormous flying...
Willie. Yeah. What's that? Well, it looks like a giant... Johnson. Yes, sir.
Time for more expository narration. Take it away, Katara.
We presented ourselves to the royal court. My brother and the princess became friends right away.
That's teenage hormones for you.
Aang showed them he was the last airbender, and was accepted to train with the master. The city knew our arrival would bring great danger, and they prepared for war they knew would come in the ensuing weeks.
You know, I think I just figured out what all these stupid narration segments are. Bear with me for 1 second, I want to try something.
Previously on Avatar.
We presented ourselves to the royal court. My brother and the princess became friends right away. Aang showed them he was the last airbender, and was accepted to train with the master. The city knew our arrival would bring great danger, and they prepared for war they knew would come in the ensuing weeks.
I will be damned. They actually made a major motion picture out of TV episode intros. This isn't Avatar the movie, this is previously on Avatar the movie. So Aang and Katara begin to learn waterbending from Master Pakku. While this is going on, Sokka tries to get his game on with Princess Yue, and these two have all the on-screen chemistry of stale bread. During their conversation, we get... what else? More backstory! Yue was born very sick and wasn't going to last long, so her parents prayed to the Moon Spirit for help. The Moon Spirit took pity on them and breathed life into their daughter, turning her hair white in the process. Unlike most of the pointless backstory that seems to encompass half the film, this actually is important, and we'll find out why in a bit. Meanwhile, on the water of the ocean... no, I'm not letting that go. The Fire Nation is making its way to the Northern Water Tribe. General Iroh has agreed to assist Commander Asswipe with the battle, and look who he managed to smuggle on board. Yes, Zuko's alive. And even if you haven't seen the cartoon, this should not surprise you. Back in the north, Aang and Katara continue to practice waterbending. Or at least I think that's what they're supposed to be doing, but... nothing's happening. Why is nothing happening? No one else in the film moves like this unless they're bending, so... did they seriously forget to add the effects to this shot? Anyway, ash starts raining from the sky, which means the Fire Nation is on their way. Aang decides to ask the Dragon Spirit for guidance, you know, because his information was so helpful the last time, so Yue takes him to the most spiritual place in the city.
To get your airbending tattoos, you have to meditate for long periods of time, without losing focus. Some of the great monks can meditate for 4 days.
Okay. That's nice. This is important because... Aang enters a trance, and Sokka and Yue leave the area. Katara sticks around, but she is soon joined by Zuko, who managed to sneak into the city. Katara tries to fight him off, but fails, and Zuko kidnaps the Avatar. While the Fire Nation Navy begins their attack, Aang meets the Dragon Spirit again, and he tells him to use the power of the ocean against the Fire Nation. So he should counter fire with water. Well, no shit! Aang wakes up and immediately starts fighting with Zuko, but the fight ends when Katara shows up and intervenes.
I was frozen today!
Oh yeah, now we get to see the Flying Bison kick some ass! Or... not. I didn't edit that at all. That's all we see of Appa in the entire battle. He goes, roar, and that's it. That's some serious horseshit right there. Zhao and Iroh enter the spiritual oasis and find two fish circling each other in the water. It turns out these are actually the physical forms of the ocean and moon spirits. Zhao snags the moon spirit, which is the source of the waterbender's power. The heroes then show up, but Zhao kills the moon spirit before they can stop him. The sky turns red and the waterbenders suddenly lose their powers, allowing the firebenders to take control of the battle. Iroh isn't too happy about his comrade committing deicide, and, much to their surprise, he starts conjuring fire out of thin air. This scares Zhao and his troops away. This also makes everyone who has seen the cartoon do a collective facepalm, because in the cartoon, this was not uncommon. Every firebender could conjure fire as well as manipulate it. Our heroes believe all is now lost, but Iroh points out that there is a way to bring the moon spirit back. Since the spirit once breathed life into Yue, she can sacrifice herself and return that life to the spirit. Sokka protests because he hasn't even made it to second base yet, but Yue tells him it's the only way. After a goodbye kiss, she returns her life to the moon spirit. With the moon spirit back, waterbending returns as well. The troops are easily defeated with the power of slow motion, Zuko and Iroh escape, Commander Zhao is killed, and Aang unleashes the mother of all tidal waves on the Fire Nation Navy, which I will admit looks pretty fucking cool. Oh, and since they planned on this film having a sequel, we get a cliffhanger ending where Fire Lord Ozai commands his daughter Azula to hunt down and stop the Avatar before he can learn how to bend earth and fire, a task she gladly accepts. I wish the Fire Lord would assign her the task of hunting down and stopping M. Night Shyamalan before he makes another awful movie. It's easy to see why so many critics consider this one of the worst movies of 2010. But despite their opinions and the huge production and promotion budgets, it did do well enough at the box office worldwide to make a profit. However, the profit likely wasn't large enough to warrant a sequel. We can only hope. I will admit the film wasn't completely devoid of merit. A few details aside, it did stay true to the source material overall, and ILM did a great job with the special effects as usual. But the effects couldn't do anything to hide the horrible dialogue or the lame choreography during the bending sequences. Shyamalan also tried to cram way too much of Season 1 of the cartoon, 20 half-hour episodes, into a sub-2-hour movie, and it shows. The whole thing feels very rushed. And the acting. My God! I've seen better acting in porn! I know many of these actors are just children, but let's go back to The Sixth Sense again. Haley Joel Osment was 10 when that movie was made, younger than both Noah Ringer and Nicola Peltz, who were 12 and 14 respectively, and Osment was nominated for an Oscar! The point is, Shyamalan has been able to find talented child actors in the past. Why was he not able to do so for this film? And why would he cast Jackson Rathbone? Did he not see any of the Twilight movies?
It wasn't very smart.
Bottom line, if you want to see this story done properly, watch the cartoon. The movie is a complete waste of your time. I'm the Smeghead, and Hollywood can suck it.